Εδεσιμολογιότατε Άγιο Κοσμήτορα της Θεολογικής Σχολής του Αριστοτελείου Πανεπιστημίου Θεσσαλονίκης, πατέρα Αθανάση Γκίκα. Εδεσιμολογιότατε Πρωτοπρεσβύτερε πατέρα Νικόλαο Εστόκα, εκπρόσωπε του Παναγιωτάτου Μητροπολίτη Θεσσαλονίκης. Αξιότιμε διευθυντά της Αγιορειτικής Εστίας, κύριε Αναστάσια Ντούρο. Ελογιμότατοι κύριοι καθηγητές, σεβαστοί πατέρες, κυρίες και κύριοι, καλημέρα σας. Σας καλωσορίζουμε στην εκδήλωση που συνδιοργανώνει η Αγιορειτική Εστία με τη Θεολογική Σχολή Θεσσαλονίκης του Αριστοτελείου Πανεπιστημίου Θεσσαλονίκης για την παρουσίαση του έργου του Βρετανού καλλιτέχνη Tim Vyner από τα ταξίδια του στο Άγιο Όρος και στα Μετέωρα. Πρόκειται, όπως θα διαπιστώσετε, για ένα ιδιαίτερο εγχείρημα που αποτυπώνει με ποικιλία εκφραστικών μέσων, εικόνες, εντυπώσεις, περιστατικά, ακόμη και φευγαλές στιγμές από την καθημερινή ζωή των πατέρων, από τη μεγαλοπρέπεια της αγιορειτικής και όχι μόνο αρχιτεκτονικής, αλλά και το μοναδικό φυσικό περιβάλλον, ένα έργο που ο κύριος Vyner κληροδοτεί στον άθο, αλλά και στο ελληνικό και διεθνές κοινό. Καλούμε λοιπόν στο βήμα τον Άγιο Κοσμήτορα της Θεολογικής Σχολής, πατέρα Αθανάσιο Γκίκα, να απευθύνει χαιρετισμό.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Καλημέρα σας. Θεωρώ ότι σήμερα, παρά την δυσκολία της ημέρας, που όπως γνωρίζετε έχουμε μια γενική απεργία η οποία εμποδίζει και πολλούς να έρθουν για να συμμετάσχουν σε αυτό το ωραίο συμπόσιο, θα λέγαμε, που σήμερα παρατίθεται εδώ στη σχολή μας. Θεωρώ ότι είναι μια ευκαιρία την οποία ευτυχώς τα ηλεκτρονικά μέσα μπορούν να την διασώσουν και η Αγιορειτική Εστία θα μπορέσει ενδεχομένως να την κυκλοφορήσει, ώστε και οι άλλοι που θα είχαν ενδιαφέρον σήμερα και εμποδίστηκαν να είναι μαζί μας, να μπορέσουν να απολαύσουν αυτό το συμπόσιο. Θεωρώ πολύ καλή την ευκαιρία αυτής της συνεργασίας με την Αγιορειτική Εστία, η οποία συμπληρώνει έτσι την αγαστή μας συνεργασία σε πολλές άλλες περιπτώσεις και εκδηλώσεις και δηλώνει την έτσι αναζήτηση μέσα από αυτή τη συνεργασία να φέρνουμε στο προσκήνιο της Θεσσαλονίκης και του Πανεπιστημίου ιδιαίτερα την αγιορειτική ατμόσφαιρα, η οποία είναι πολύ σημαντική στην αλληλοπεριχώρηση αυτού του πνεύματος που βγαίνει από το περιβόλι της Παναγίας με την ευλογία της, με την παρουσία των πατέρων μέσα στην πόλη μας, η οποία έχει ένα στέκι που ονομάζεται Αγιορειτική Εστία και το οποίο προβάλλει σε πολλές πτυχές την αγιορειτική ταυτότητα, τόσο στο πλαίσιο του πολιτισμού, όσο και κυρίως στο πλαίσιο της πνευματικότητας και της θεολογίας, όπως αυτή βιώνεται και μας βοηθάει να συνδυάσουμε και εμείς, πέρα από την ακαδημαϊκή θεωρητική θεολογία που προσεγγίζει τον μοναχισμό, είτε με την ιστορική της έκφανση, είτε με την πολιτισμική της έκφανση, είτε με την πνευματικότητα, με την πνευματική της έκφανση ως έναν τρόπο ζωής. Θεωρώ ότι είναι πολύ σημαντική αυτή η επικοινωνία, αυτή η συνεργασία και ευχαριστούμε την Αγιορειτική Εστία που μας συμπεριλαμβάνει στους συνεργάτες της και η σημερινή αυτή εκδήλωση είναι σημαντική γιατί υπάρχει πολύ μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον για την κληρονομιά του Αγίου Όρους, πέρα από την θεολογία, αλλά και στα σημεία έκφρασης της θεολογίας που συναποτελούν αυτό που θα λέγαμε είναι η ταυτότητα του Αγίου Όρους. Τα κοιμήλια του Αγίου Όρους δεν είναι απλά κοιμήλια για προθήκες, είναι μέσα στην καθημερινότητα της ζωής των πατέρων και συνεχίζουν να έχουν την λειτουργικότητα της δημιουργίας τους. θαυμάζουμε πολλές φορές αυτά που είναι στις προθήκες των μουσείων, αλλά για το Άγιον Όρος αυτά είναι σκεύη λειτουργικά, που σημαίνει ότι παράγουν έργο ακόμη και σήμερα για τον σκοπό για τον οποίο δημιουργήθηκαν και διανθίζουν την ομορφιά της ζωής του Άγιον Όρος, η οποία εκτιλήσεται μέσα στους χώρους των μονών, οι οποίες με έναν πολύ θαυμαστό τρόπο συνδυάζουν την ζωή, την μοναχική, μέσα από το δίπτυχο της λατρείας και του κελιού και της επαφής με τους ανθρώπους. Σήμερα έχουμε την χαρά να είναι μαζί μας ο Tim Vyner, ένας, θα λέγαμε, από τους περιηγητές του Αγίου Όρους, οι οποίοι με την παρουσία τους εκεί, την πρώτη φορά, την δεύτερη φορά και ίσως και άλλες επόμενες, αποτυπώνουν μέσα από την δική τους αίσθηση ό,τι συναντάει το μάτι τους στο Άγιον Όρος. Υπάρχει ένα λεύκομα που έχει εκδοθεί από το πρώτο ταξίδι του ζωγράφου Tim Vyner στο Άγιον Όρος το 2013, η οποία έχει πάρα πολλά αποτυπώματα των συναισθημάτων, των παρατηρήσεων, των βιωμάτων, των προβληματισμών, της έκφρασης δια της τέχνης όλων αυτών, και νομίζω είναι ένας πολύτιμος οδηγός, αν κάποιος θέλει να δει ή να νιώσει και ο ίδιος μέσα από τα σκίτσα, μέσα από τις εικόνες που αποτυπώνονται, να συμπορευτεί με αυτό που ο ζωγράφος θέλησε να αποτυπώσει. Πραγματικά υπάρχουν πολλοί τέτοιοι ζωγράφοι, ο καθένας βέβαια με τον χαρακτήρα του και τον τύπο του, και μέσα σε αυτό το άλμπουμ μπορούμε να διέλθουμε έναν δρόμο ο οποίος μπορεί να μας χαρίσει όμορφες σκηνές, αν θέλετε και όμορφες φαντασίες, από αυτό που μερικές φορές δεν μπορούμε να βρούμε μέσα στα δεδομένα που μας δίδει η όλη ατμόσφαιρα του Αγίου Όρους. Συγχαίρουμε την Αγιορειτική Εστία που σήμερα μας παρουσιάζει δια της διάλεξης του κυρίου Vyner το έργο του και το τι αυτός έχει αποκομίσει από το Άγιον Όρος. Μάλιστα και αυτές τις μέρες που είναι εδώ μια δεύτερη επίσκεψη στο Άγιον Όρος, πιστεύω του έδωσε καινούργια ενάψματα για έναν καινούριο οδηγό ή ένα λεύκομα για τις αποτυπώσεις των τωρινών εμπειριών, γιατί οπωσδήποτε από το 2013 μέχρι σήμερα έχουν αλλάξει πολλά πράγματα και ενδεχομένως βλέποντας αυτά τα δύο λευκόματα μπορούμε να αισθανθούμε και εμείς την πορεία του πολιτισμού μέσα σε μια εξέλιξη, μέσα σε μια ανάπτυξη η οποία ανταποκρίνεται στα δεδομένα των ανθρώπων που δημιουργούν αυτόν τον πολιτισμό. Εύχομαι αυτή η σημερινή εκδήλωση να συγκινήσει και όσους είμαστε εδώ παρόντες για μια προσέγγιση ή και για μια δική μας, για μεν τους άντρες, να επιχειρήσουν μια εκ του σύνεγγυς βιωματική εμπειρία αυτών που ενδεχομένως θα τους εμπνεύσουν μέσα από το λεύκομα, από την διάλεξη, και βεβαίως και στις κυρίες, τις αγαπητές μας κυρίες, οι οποίες δεν μπορούν να πάνε στο Άγιον Όρος, αλλά μπορούν έτσι με τη δική τους αίσθηση να αντιληφθούν τα δεδομένα του Αγίου Όρους, που είναι πάρα πολλά και θα μπορούσαμε να τα περικλείσουμε μέσα στην λέξη. Είναι μια μεγάλη ευλογία με κάθε επικοινωνία οπτική ή επεξεργαστική μέσα στο νου μας για το τι μπορεί να μας προσφέρει το Άγιον Όρος μέσα από όλες τις δυνατότητες που σήμερα έρχονται κοντά μας. Συγχαίρουμε τον κύριο Vyner για την προσφορά του και τον παρακαλούμε να μας εξηγήσει τα βιώματά του, να μας τα παραθέσει και να μπορούμε να αποκρυπτογραφήσουμε τα σκίτσα και τις εικόνες που έχει ζωγραφίσει και να εμπνευστούν κάποιοι να κάνουν και εκείνοι καινούργιες δημιουργίες. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ και ευχόμαστε τα καλύτερα σαν περιεχόμενο αυτής της όμορφης εκδήλωσης.
Ευχαριστούμε θερμά, Άγιε Κοσμήτορα, για τα όσα μας έχετε πει και θα θέλαμε βέβαια να ευχαριστήσουμε θερμά και τον ελογιμότατο πρόεδρο κύριο Απόστολο Κραλίδη, πρόεδρο του Τμήματος Κοινωνικής Θεολογίας και Χριστιανικού Πολιτισμού, για την τιμή της παρουσίας του στην εκδήλωσή μας. Στην συνέχεια, ο διευθυντής της Αγιορειτικής Εστίας, κύριος Αναστάσιος Ντούρος, θα μας εισάγει στο πνεύμα των έργων του Tim Vyner. Και όχι μόνο.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Να το κλείσουμε και ακούγουμε. Λοιπόν, εδεσμολογιότατε Άγιε Κοσμήτορα, εδεσμολογιότατε Πρωτοπρεσβύτερε Πατέρα Νικόλαε Στόκα, εκπρόσωπε του Παναγιωτάτου Μητροπολίτου, αγαπητέ κύριε Κραλίδη, πρόεδρε του Τμήματος Κοινωνικής Θεολογίας και Χριστιανικού Πολιτισμού, αγαπητοί κύριε καθηγητά, κύριε Πασχαλίδη, διευθυντή του Πατριαρχικού Ιδρύματος Πατερικών Μελετών, αγαπητοί καθηγητές, αγαπητοί φίλοι, χαιρόμαστε πολύ που βρισκόμαστε σήμερα εδώ στη Θεολογική Σχολή για την εκδήλωση αυτή. Ξεκινώντας, θα ήθελα να μεταφέρω τους χαιρετισμούς του Προέδρου του Διοικητικού Συμβουλίου της Αγιορειτικής Εστίας, Δημάρχου Θεσσαλονίκης, του κυρίου Αγγελούδη, καθώς και των υπόλοιπων μελών του Διοικητικού μας Συμβουλίου, να μεταφέρω τις ευχαριστίες τους για αυτή την όμορφη συνεργασία με την Θεολογική Σχολή, η οποία συνεργασία φυσικά κρατάει πολλά χρόνια. Έχουμε συνεργαστεί και στο παρελθόν για την διοργάνωση συνεδρίων και πολλών άλλων εκδηλώσεων. Σήμερα η συνεργασία αυτή έχει χαρακτήρα εικαστικό και νομίζω πως θα πρέπει να πούμε ότι θα χωριστεί σε δύο ενότητες. Η πρώτη ενότητα θα αφορά την παρουσίαση, την εξαποστάσεως παρουσίαση και παρουσία εδώ του Βρετανού αρχιτέκτονα και ζωγράφου Α.Π.Θ, ο οποίος δεν μπορούσε να ταξιδέψει, ο οποίος θα μας μιλήσει και αυτός αρχικά για τη δουλειά που έχει κάνει στο Άγιον Όρος, και το συνδέουμε αυτό με την παρουσία του Tim Vyner, καθώς ο Α.Π.Θ ήταν αυτός ο οποίος ξεκίνησε τη σύσταση της υποτροφίας που είχε γίνει το 2012 μεταξύ του ιδίου, του Royal College of Art του Λονδίνου και της Αγιορειτικής Εστίας, με την οποία ένας απόφοιτος από το Royal College of Art θα ταξίδευε στο Άγιον Όρος ανά 2-3 χρόνια και θα έκανε ένα μεγάλο αρχείο, το οποίο θα παρουσιαζόταν στην Αγιορειτική Εστία στη Θεσσαλονίκη και αλλού. Ο πρώτος υπότροφος της υποτροφίας αυτής ήταν ο Tim Vyner, ο οποίος το 2013 έκανε 3 μεγάλα πολυήμερα ταξίδια στο Άγιον Όρος. Κάθε ταξίδι έμεινε από 20 μέρες έως 1 μήνα στο Άγιον Όρος. Γύρισε όλα τα μοναστήρια του Αγίου Όρους. Τα κατέγραψε μέσα από τα έργα του, τα οποία έργα του είναι σχέδια, ακουαρέλες και έργα ψηφιακής ζωγραφικής. Ο ίδιος εξειδικεύεται πάνω σε στην τεχνική αυτή. Είναι καθηγητής στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Α.Π.Θ, θα τα πούμε και αργότερα βέβαια, και το μάθημα που διδάσκει είναι αυτό ακριβώς, η ψηφιακή ζωγραφική. Θα ξεκινήσουμε λοιπόν με τον Α.Π.Θ. Να σας διαβάσω κάποια στοιχεία από το βιογραφικό του Α.Π.Θ. Λοιπόν, ο Α.Π.Θ. ξεκίνησε τις σπουδές του στο Hornsey College of Art και στο Royal College of Art του Λονδίνου, από όπου έλαβε τον τίτλο του Μαγίστρου των Τεχνών. Ακολούθησαν σπουδές αρχιτεκτονικής στην περίφημη Σχολή Αρχιτεκτονικής Architectural Association του Λονδίνου, από όπου και αποφοίτησε το 1974, ιδρύοντας την ίδια χρονιά τη δική του εταιρεία design. Για τα επόμενα 25 χρόνια σχεδίασε μια ευρεία γκάμα παραγγελιών και ποικίλων δημιουργικών projects που περιλαμβάνουν από σκηνικά για ταινίες μέχρι το σχεδιασμό μιας ιδιωτικής έπαυλης εμπνευσμένη από την αρχιτεκτονική Μογκούλ της Ινδίας και τον σχεδιασμό του εξωτερικού του κήπου σε ένα ιδιωτικό νησί στις Δυτικές Ινδίες, στο οποίο πραγματοποίησε εξ ολοκλήρου τον σχεδιασμό, την έρευνα και την κατασκευή. Στη συνέχεια εργάστηκε στο σχεδιασμό θαλαμιγών ως καλλιτεχνικός διευθυντής, δημιουργώντας 2 ιδιωτικούς θαλαμιγούς των 126 και 60 μέτρων αντίστοιχα. Παράλληλα, έχει πραγματοποιήσει πολυάριθμες αρχιτεκτονικές κατασκευές και διάφορες καλλιτεχνικές αναθέσεις σε πολλές χώρες, όπως στη ΣΥΠΑ, στο Τατζικιστάν, στη Σαουδική Αραβία, στην Ελλάδα, στη Ρωσία, στην Κούβα, στην Ινδία και στην Αγγλία. Από το 2001 έως το 2010 ακολούθησε ανιχνευτικά τα βήματα των 3 ζωγράφων περιηγητών του 18ου και 19ου αιώνα, Βασίλη Γκριγκόροβιτς Μπάρσκι, Σάμουελ Ντέιβις και Χέρκουλες Μπραμπαζόν, στα ταξίδια τους ανά τον κόσμο, στην προσπάθειά τους να αποτυπώσουν ζωγραφικά τις 3 μεγάλες θρησκείες του κόσμου, τον Ορθόδοξο Χριστιανισμό, το Ισλάμ και τον Βουδισμό. Αυτό περιλάμβανε τη σχεδίαση και εικαστική απόδοση των Ορθόδοξων Χριστιανικών μοναστηριών του Αγίου Όρους και των Μετεώρων στην Ελλάδα και την Αγία Κατερίνη στο Σινά, τεμένων και άλλων Ισλαμικών μνημείων στη Βόρεια Αφρική και στην Ινδία και των 20 βουδιστικών μοναστηριών Τζόγκς στο Μπουτάν. Το υλικό του από το εγχείρημα αυτό παρουσιάστηκε στο Royal National Theatre του Λονδίνου. Το 2014 ανατέθηκε στον Ντακ Πάτερσον ο σχεδιασμός και η κατασκευή ενός καταράκτη 75 μέτρων σε ένα νησί στις Δυτικές Ινδίες, που ήταν και το αποκορύφωμα του δεκαετούς έργου του. Τα τελευταία 30 χρόνια έργα του έχουν παρουσιαστεί σε ατομικές και ομαδικές εκθέσεις και πίνακες του έχουν συμπεριληφθεί σε εξαιρετικές ιδιωτικές συλλογές, εκθεσιακούς χώρους και μουσεία ανά τον κόσμο. Έτσι. Στη Θεσσαλονίκη, στην Αγιορειτική Εστία, η έκθεση του Ντακ Πάτερσον έγινε το 2011 με μεγάλη επιτυχία και επίσης ταξίδεψε και σε άλλα σημεία στην Ελλάδα και στο εξωτερικό. Λοιπόν, να προσπαθήσουμε τώρα να συνδεθούμε με τον Ντακ για να τον ακούσουμε.
Good morning. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah, good morning. We can hear you.
Yeah, I had to quickly rewrite my speech after I listened to that in Greek. Not that I speak Greek, but I got the gist of it. I think you covered most points. Basically, I should really emphasize before I start, I graduated in architecture and at the Royal College of Art. And so my work has always been divided between architecture and art. But today I'm actually just going to talk about my Mount Athos project. And this was probably the most inspiring project I've ever done. I'm not saying that because I'm speaking to people in Greece, but it was. But it started in the most peculiar way. I was working in Athens and on a boat and designing a boat and building a boat in Elefsina. And I went to draw the library, the National Library. And when I got there, I mean, the librarian said to me, what have you come to research? And I couldn't think of anything really that I could just come up with. And I said, oh, Mount Athos. So I sat down and started making a drawing of the inside of the library. And then these books turned up on Mount Athos. So I skimmed through these books and I was just completely blown away. Coming from England, I'd never seen buildings like that. So I decided I'd set out on a quest in that afternoon in the library that I was going to apply for permission, go to Mount Athos and draw all 20 of the monasteries. And that's what I did. But it was a very strange beginning. So I applied for a visa and I embarked on my first trip. And I have to say, it was not easy because I was kind of, I think you could say I was slightly hippie-esque. And I had a long kirta. And one of the monks said, you can't travel in a skirt. You know, it's just not on here. And it was, so once I got over my dress, I then was very lucky. And I met somebody in my life who was totally instrumental. And that was Father Ionikios from the monastery of Dinasio. And he told me all about the monastery. And then he said, you know, that I could stay there while I was drawing. But anyway, he asked me for my drawings and he took my drawings off to the abbot. And when he came back, he said, the abbot wants to see you. So I went in, spoke with the abbot, and we spoke for quite a while. He seemed very taken with my drawings. And then but he kept calling me Baski all the time. So when I came out of the meeting, I didn't know who this Baski was. So I said to Father Ionikios, why does he call me Baski, the abbot? He said, he thinks you are Baski. So I said, who is Baski? He said, well, he drew all the monasteries on Mount Athos. And I said, I'd really like to meet him. And Father Ionikios, who was very understated, he said to me, Douglas, that's very difficult. I said, why is that? He said he died in 1748, you know. So after that, I started the research, and it went on into Vasilis Grigorovich Basky. This Ukraine traveler and Orthodox monk was such an amazing man. I mean, he traveled extensively for 25 years, documenting buildings and monasteries. And I mean, it's such an insight into the way things were then. And he visited the monastic peninsula of Athos and drew all the monasteries there, which I decided to do. When I started to study his drawings, the most interesting thing was that his drawings were axonometrics, right? What I mean by that is the next slide might show it. I'm seeing them down the side. They're drawn at an angle, which architects call axonometrics. And I don't think that slide is showing you guys. I can see them down the side. But it was just a phenomena to discover these drawings that were very accurate of the monasteries, but they were drawn from the sea, or they appeared to be in most cases. And his observation of windows and everything else was really quite amazing. So, you know, I visited Mount Athos really about 12 times in total. And it was quite something. I mean, you know, drawing and going around all the different monasteries. I was really hosted in a very, very interesting way. I got to see everything. You know, it became a real obsession. So this project took me about 2.5 years to produce. And I then went on to Meteora, and I then went down into St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai. But when I came to the end of this project, which had been quite obsessive for me, as you can see there, that's obviously from inland, but when some of the drawings, but they're always at these angles where he's looking down. But it's not all the monasteries you can get to do precisely that. So it's more complicated when they're drawn from the sea. I don't know how that took place. This one in particular, it's actually from the ocean. And then you see all the gardens from his drawings. So he was very instrumental in what I was doing, very instrumental. But there's such a great record of what, you know, his own records from that period. See, this one, that's a very good example that they're from the sea. And then being able to see the gardens. So they were very influential in my own work. You know, I'm essentially kind of, I work online. But as I came to the end of my own study, of my own portfolio, my drawings are all mostly watercolors and line. So I sort of, so I have to move to do these. They're very wide perspective. So you don't tend to see everything in one go. So I might move 3 or 4 times in the process of doing these drawings. But as I mentioned, as I came to the end of Mount Athos, my work on Mount Athos, I looked for another project. And it's then I discovered another traveler, a man called Samuel Davis, who traveled he was 1760 to 1809. But what was interesting is in Bhutan, there are 20 zongs or monasteries, the same as Mount Athos. And they were built more or less at the same time. So when you see these buildings, I mean, it's such I've drawn this building many times, and it's sort of, Similis Petra, it's just incredible to draw. But Samuel Davis was on a diplomatic mission and he got stranded in Bhutan and he drew only 6 of the zongs there. But I went up there 3 times and did all the zongs on. That's I love also going down there to the tip of Mount Athos on the boat in the winter. It's so spectacular there. It's like another place. So just coming back to Davis, I mean, he suddenly, I decided that I would go up to Bhutan and draw all these. So 3 times, I was very lucky. I was given permission by the royal family. So I went really where it was quite difficult to get to, including the last monastery that I went to, or the last zong, which was Linji, which is, I had to cross a pass 5,500 meters. Well, I'm not exactly a spring chicken, so climbing over there wasn't exactly easy. But both these projects I exhibited in London, and then I decided that I would give a scholarship to the Royal College, so to make sure that another artist would record all 20, which Tim was given. So this has been, it was an amazing time for me visiting Mount Athos. Of all the projects I've ever had over the years, I've never been anywhere that really touched me as much as that. Not only spiritually, but I think in terms of visually, it was such a feast to draw, just a wonderful place to draw. So, I think that I look back and I can honestly say, I was extremely lucky, because when I studied at the Royal College, and I'm sure Tim will reinforce this, I mean, we were taught in all disciplines, and then I went on to architecture, but I always thought when I was at the Royal College, I'm going to live the rest of my life like I'm at the Royal College. It was such a great place. And somehow I've kind of managed to do that by working on architecture, working on some self-induced projects, some commissions. But, we're very lucky that there's such a place in the world, and we should pray for peace, because that's what the world needs at the moment. It's chaotic. I'm sorry I couldn't speak in Greek, but I'm sure Tim will follow me, and his Greek is excellent. I know it is. And thank you all for listening to this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Πολύ ωραία. Περνάμε τώρα στη δεύτερη φάση, στη δεύτερη ενότητα της εκδήλωσης, όπου θα ακούσουμε τον Tim Vyner θα μας μιλήσει για την εμπειρία που είχε από το ταξίδια του στο Άγιον Όρος τόσο το 2013, όσο και πριν από λίγες ημέρες, γιατί η εκδήλωση πραγματοποιείται με αφορμή την επίσκεψη του Tim στην Ελλάδα, την επίσκεψή του στα Μετέωρα την προηγούμενη εβδομάδα, όπου έμεινε κάποιες ημέρες και εκεί ζωγράφησε, έκανε κάποια σχέδια από τα Μετέωρα που δεν είχε ξαναπάει, και ακολούθως μπήκε και στο Άγιον Όρος, έμεινε και εκεί κάποιες λίγες μέρες και εκεί πήρε κάποιο καινούριο υλικό. Η προοπτική είναι του χρόνου, πρώτα ο Θεός, να γίνει μία έκθεση με τη νέα δουλειά, γιατί όπως είπε και ο Άγιος Κοσμήτορας, όντως έχουν αλλάξει πολλά και στο Άγιον Όρος και στα Μετέωρα φυσικά, αλλά επίσης αυτό που έχει αλλάξει είναι και η τεχνική με την οποία δουλεύει, ότι έχει εξελιχθεί και ο ίδιος, οπότε ήθελε να δουλέψει με τη νέα τεχνική. Προτού δώσουμε το λόγο στον Tim Vyner, επιτρέψτε μου να διαβάσω το βιογραφικό του. Λοιπόν, ο Tim Vyner σπούδασε στο Camberwell College of Arts and Crafts και στο Royal College of Art, όπου αποφοίτησε το 1988, λαμβάνοντας το δίπλωμα Master of Arts. Αμέσως μετά την αποφοίτησή του, ταξίδεψε στην Κένια για λογαριασμό του World Wide Fund for Nature και ξεκίνησε τη σταδιοδρομία του στον τομέα του εικονογραφημένου ρεπορτάζ, συνεργαζόμενος με εκδότες, εφημερίδες, γκαλερί και συλλέκτες, στην οποία αφοσιώθηκε τα τελευταία 25 χρόνια. Εξακολουθεί να ταξιδεύει, να εκθέτει το έργο του και να προβαίνει συχνά σε δημοσιεύσεις, ενώ ταυτόχρονα ασκεί τα ακαδημαϊκά του καθήκοντα ως καθηγητής Professor of Illustration στο Bath Spa University. Το 2000 ο Tim ταξίδεψε στον Λίβανο σε μια από τις σπάνιες ειρηνικές περιόδους στη ζωή της χώρας, προκειμένου να καταγράψει τη μετάβαση στην ειρήνη ύστερα από την καταστροφή ολόκληρων γενεών στις φλόγες του εμφυλίου πολέμου. Το 2002 κατέγραψε τις εντυπώσεις του από το Παγκόσμιο Κύπελλο Ποδοσφαίρου που διοργανώθηκε για πρώτη φορά στην Ασία για λογαριασμό της Professional Footballers Association, με αποτέλεσμα να αναπτύξει μια δεκαετή σχέση με το αγγλικό ποδόσφαιρο. Στο βιβλίο του για παιδιά με τίτλο World Team, το οποίο εκδόθηκε από τον εκδοτικό οίκο Random House, απονεμήθηκε έπαινος κατά την απονομή των βραβείων V&A Illustration. Το 2008 παρακολούθησε απευθείας 24 αγωνίσματα σε 19 ημέρες στο πλαίσιο των θρυλικών Ολυμπιακών Αγώνων του Πεκίνου, με αποκορύφωση τη διοργάνωση ατομικής έκθεσης στην Bankside Gallery του Λονδίνου, έδρα της Royal Watercolour Society, της οποίας εξελέγει Associate Member το διάστημα 2008 έως 2012. Το 2012 η εφημερίδα The Times του Λονδίνου ανέθεσε την καλλιτεχνική κάλυψη των Ολυμπιακών Αγώνων του Λονδίνου, κατά τη διάρκεια των οποίων εργάστηκε με την υποχρέωση να παραδίδει 3 σχέδια ημερησίως για τις έντυπες εκδόσεις, καθώς και ηλεκτρονικό περιεχόμενο που έπρεπε να συνοδεύεται από κείμενο 500 λέξεων σε ημερήσια βάση. Φιλοτέχνησε μία πανοραμική άποψη του Ολυμπιακού Πάρκου, η οποία χρησιμοποιήθηκε σε ένα από τα αναμνηστικά εξώφυλλα της εφημερίδας. Εξακολουθεί να ταξιδεύει, να αναλαμβάνει έργα στην Αφρική, την Κεντρική, Βόρεια και Νότια Αμερική, την Κίνα, την Ιαπωνία και ολόκληρη την Ευρώπη. Στο πλαίσιο της κοινής υποτροφίας Doug Patterson Royal College of Art Αγιορειτικής Εστίας, η οποία του χορηγήθηκε το 2013, ο Tim επισκέφτηκε και τις 20 ιερές μονές του Αγίου Όρους. Κατά τη διάρκεια των 3 επισκέψεων που πραγματοποίησε εντός του 2013 στο Άγιον Όρος, φιλοτέχνησε έργα επιτόπου, καθώς και υδατογραφίες που ολοκληρώθηκαν στο ατελιέ του στην Αγγλία βάσει των εμπειριών του. Έτσι. Η έκθεση αυτή που έγινε το 2014 στην Αγιορειτική Εστία συνοδεύτηκε και από έναν πολύ όμορφο κατάλογο, ο οποίος περιλαμβάνει όλο το υλικό του Tim Vyner από τη δουλειά του στο Άγιον Όρος. Φυσικά μπορείτε να το βρείτε, πωλείται και στην Αγιορειτική Εστία. Και νομίζω πως ήρθε η ώρα ο Tim να λάβει το λόγο και να μας πει και να μας δείξει όσα έχει να μας πει. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Swap computers over now.
Επίσης, να σας πω ότι στο τέλος, αφού τελειώσει την παρουσίαση του Tim, όποιος έχει κάποια ερώτηση να κάνει στον ίδιο, φυσικά μπορεί να γίνει μια συζήτηση για το έργο του.
Up on screen, yeah. Okay. Yep. And you can hear me okay? Nope. A little closer. Okay. Thanks for the introduction, Anastasios. Great to hear from you too, Doug. Amazing sort of inspiration for this project. And one of the things I'm going to start with is when I talk to my students in Bath about presenting their work, the one rule I say is never start with an excuse or an apology. And I'm afraid I'm going to start with 2. So I'm breaking the rules I teach the students. But it's basically I'm apologizing because I don't speak Greek. And I realize I'm the minority in the room today. And secondly, I'm not Orthodox. And so I'm aware that any observations I'm making about Mount Athos today are ones that will be from an outsider's point of view. I was always made welcome, mostly, made welcome throughout my time. But I'm aware that while I'm getting closer through a second visit this year, it is the observations of an outsider. So I think the presentation now, I'm going to break down into sort of 3 parts. I've spoken to Anastasios about this, so I'm going to give a little background as to how what I was doing that led to the award of the bursary from Doug and the Mount Athos Centre. Then I'll talk. I'll give a sort of summary of that work that was 10 years ago now. 10 years plus 1. 11. Yeah. Well, let's call it 10. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how that work, how we disseminate that work through design. And I'll talk a little bit about the traditional analog processes of drawing and how that translates into digital processes and sharing that knowledge and experience to new audiences. And then thirdly, the possibility of a little bit of live drawing, just showing you a bit about how I work both from a sketchbook, but also using an iPad. So let me just... So going through the presentation, this is a slide by an artist called, a book called The Artist as Reporter, a kind of visual journalist. Paul Hogarth is the artist. Again, another graduate of the Royal College. And I remember he came and spoke to me. And I think, again, another question I would put out to you when I'm talking to my students and when you're potentially talking to your students, one of the things you're negotiating when you're a young person setting out in your career is, what are the non-negotiables about what you want to do? What is it that you really care about? And what is it in your practice that will remain with you forever? Technology changes, processes changes, circumstances change, but there are some things that are set in life very early on. And our experiences, Doug's talked about that, my experiences as a student. For me, it was about trying to, when I listened to Paul Hogarth, he talked about traveling, drawing to travel, experiencing ordinary lives, ordinary places, and celebrating those ordinary places as extraordinary events. So this is a drawing of the rebuilding of Gdansk in Poland post-war. And the reason I put this slide in by Paul Hogarth is it's a very grand building that's being rebuilt behind the scaffolding. But the drawing is celebrating the rebuilding process. And it's about choosing those ordinary things and making them a moment in time, a special moment in time. So I took that process. I didn't know how my career would develop, but I thought that's what I want to do. I want to travel, I want to experience different cultures, and I want to be able to draw live. And that has stayed with me throughout. And I think I'm always asking my students that, what are the things that you really care about? Interestingly, I recently asked my students that, and the things that they came back with were words like truth and authenticity. And I think that's very interesting that our students today are thinking about those things at a time when it's very difficult to know where the truth is. So I would, the early stages of my career, I'd be going out on location. If I had a commission, I would spend the payment for that commission by traveling somewhere. This is in China in the late 1980s, traveling down the Yangtze River. The watercolors that I'm using here, it was the water from the river that mixed with the pigment, and it was very much about the location. And the work would then get published on its return. Books for Penguin. Then I would go to, I visited Lebanon at the turn of the century. And there's a kind of war damaged building with some graffiti on it that says something along the lines of, if we don't stop fighting, there will never be peace. This is 20 years ago, and it seems ever present now. That building may not be there anymore. That graffiti may not be there anymore, but the message is the same. That is on the southern border of northern border of Israel, southern border of Lebanon. And one of the things that I would do whenever I traveled is I would stop and watch a group of people playing football somewhere. And it's a universal language. It's a game that everyone plays in any part of the world. And you don't have to speak the language, but I would always have that connection with that group. I look at this group now, and this group of teenagers will now be in their late 30s, maybe. And I wonder what they're doing now. And that took me on a journey, professional journey, with an association with the English football team, where I got the opportunity to go to World Cups, drawing, capturing an event, drawing live, that consistent message. This was in Japan in 2002. This was in Russia in 2018. I would draw in a particular place with the fans, and that work would be published in the newspapers. I got the chance to go to the Olympic Games in Beijing, and I was aware that the work that I would produce at the tournament would only be hosted in an exhibition after the event, maybe 3 to 6 months after the event. And the exhibition meant that you'd sort of forgotten the tournament. And I needed to find a way in which that live experience, that experience of drawing in the moment, could be captured by publishing it in real time. And that coincided with the invention of, or the sort of, the emergence of digital technology, which allowed you to draw and publish those drawings more or less in real time. So the next Olympic Games in 2012, just before I took the bursary, it was in my hometown. It was in London. And using the iPad, I got the opportunity to draw the city, the games as they happened, publishing in real time, 3 times a day for the newspaper. It was a relentless schedule. And the beautiful thing about the iPad, as opposed to the watercolor and the pen and ink line, which I love too, was the iPad can record a movie as you're drawing it. So the history of that drawing plays back and creates an animation. And these animations were published every day in the newspaper. In order to prepare for a live event, you need to be fluent with your drawing. You need to practice like a musician practices scales. So this is a drawing that I made of the Discobolus in the British Museum. It's a drawing I made when I was 17, and I thought it was a good drawing. It's a terrible drawing. The head's tiny. It's all wrong in so many ways. But I thought at 17, that was the way to draw. And in order to practice for the fluency of my live drawing, which is very, very loose, I go back to the museums, I go back to collections, and I draw and draw and draw as a form of practice. And I've drawn this character many times over the years, slowly, hopefully getting better, getting a little bit more fluent. But it's part of the preparation for those live experiences. So you can go into the city, draw on the day, maybe have 3 or 4 hours, submit your work to a newspaper deadline, and it appears published the next day. And then the other, with an event like an Olympic Games, the day after the tournament, when the global spotlight has been on the games, the tournament finishes. It's done. It's finished. And then everything turns somewhere else. Recently, I've been working for a charity called Street Child United, still about sport. And this is a charity. It's an organization that looks after and raises the profile of and fights and advocates for the lives of street-connected children around the world. And they do it through a World Cup. And it involves a lot of live drawing events like this. And it's an amazingly powerful event, being able to draw and witness the changing lives of these young people as it happens. Here is a ceremony that takes place halfway through a World Cup, where young teenagers from different parts of the world, Africa, from Asia, from America, who've never met before this week, came together and shared their experiences of living on the street. Tragic sort of lives. Some of them are trafficked, drug abuse, difficult lives. And they have this ceremony in the middle of the week called a band exchange, where you go up to someone and you swap a band. It's a tiny moment, but it's a very special moment in their week. It's a moment of trust. And I captured that in the gentle form of drawing. Drawing is a way. So it's a very simple drawing, a loose, quick moment of trust between 2 people. And it goes back to that sort of principle that I searched for early on, which is about making ordinary moments in some way special. Back to that Paul Hogarth drawing. So, having worked through these very high, intense energy events like World Cups, where the global spotlight is on as a particular place, in my email in tray popped a message from the Royal College of Art from a Mr. Doug Patterson, who talked about his experience on Mount Athos and was offering a bursary for someone to go and follow that journey and make their own journey. And I thought that could not be more different to what I've been doing. And I applied and I spoke with Doug, and we had a couple of meetings, and I was introduced to the Mount Athos Centre, and I was given the opportunity to make this drawing. Doug, you've talked about Barsky. This drawing, it's a very bad photograph, but this is in Meteora in the museum. This drawing, I couldn't believe it when I saw it. It was in an illuminated manuscript book that was from, I think, the 16th century. And I'm thinking, that can't be a 16th century drawing. It looked like it was drawn yesterday, but it was drawn in the 16th century, so full of life. And that's what I wanted to do if I got the opportunity to travel to Mount Athos. Plus, there was the added incentive that any exhibition comes and goes, but the opportunity to produce a publication, a catalogue that would be there permanently in the libraries of the monasteries, alongside the books by Doug, by Edward Lear, by Barsky, feeling that you're part of that lineage. But as I say, I was very unprepared. This wasn't a place I knew a great deal about. So Anastasios provided me with a couple of books and a map, and I packed my my bags, and I made 3 journeys across a calendar year: spring, summer, and a sort of late autumn journey. And the goal was to visit all 20 monasteries, a new survey in architectural. So apologies for my pronunciation, but Cutle Monsieur, Gregorio, Simonis Petrus, Dionysiou, St. Paul's, Iveron, Patacrantarus, Stavronikita, Vatopedi, Philotheo, Karakalu, Lavra, Zarpatamu, Ilandario, Esphigmanu, Zografu, Constamonitu, Dokioriu, Xenophontus, and Pantaleimon. So 20 traditionally produced watercolors, gouache, some observed on location, some brought back to the studio. But really, the 3 trips were very different for all sorts of reasons. After the intensity of a World Cup, it was always going to be a massive culture shock to go to Mount Athos and try and make sense of it. My first trip was difficult. I remember coming back and sharing my drawings with Doug in his studio in the end of London, and it's fair to say he was underwhelmed, and he was right to be underwhelmed. and he told me, and I needed to hear that. And you know, I'd been told that this is a place that hasn't changed for 1,000 years. I had to learn about ways in which you would behave on location. And I was there trying to find the life on the mountain. That was the title of the book, An Experience of Life on the Holy Mountain, on Mount Athos. From Careas, from Daphne, from picking up your paperwork, permission to go, from everyone dispersing in the square to disappear around the different monasteries. So I kept my sketchbook going. I walked the paths, but I was a little unsure of what I was doing, and I found it very difficult to make a connection to the monasteries because I didn't have that access to the fathers that I thought I would have. I was relying on my memory for the drawing. I was always made welcome. I was always provided for. I've not been in a place where there is no branding, there is no shops, there is no things to there's a lot of hours in the day. But then when you start to look closer, there is branding, and that branding is everywhere. And you start to look a little bit closer at the location that you're visiting. And when you start to look closer, then you discover things. So, and again, having worked with an iPad for a newspaper for 3 months, the iPad, while there was some curiosity from the fathers about what is this device, what is it doing, it didn't feel like it was the right material to be using early on in my visit. It seemed a little intrusive, so I resorted back to pen and ink and watercolor for those early trips. And then I started to see going back to the Paul Hogarth drawing, I started in 2013. It was right in the middle of this significant renovation of many of the monasteries. And having been back for a couple of days just this last week, much of that renovation process has been completed, appears to have been completed now, a massive sort of transformation. But I was interested in drawing that process of renovation as much as I was of drawing the chapels and the monasteries and the location. I wanted to draw the moment in time that was now. So I'm into my second visit now, and I did actually work out, if you want to draw the fathers, you have to get them doing something when they're working. So if they're working on a boat, they're not going to disappear. They're not going to sort of not want to be drawn. So I found myself here in Vatopedi drawing on the edge of the monastery in the port, and there's a group of fathers that were working on the boat, and they had the opportunity to draw them. As I say, some of the watercolors were made on the spot, and all the drawings were made on the spot, and then work was finished back in the studio. And I was always interested in that interaction of people, pilgrims through to fathers. This was the walk down to Stavronikita, the path, and the image on the previous slide was a painting by Edward Lear. And again, it's a lovely idea that potentially I've walked in the same footprint, perhaps. Stavronikita, the irony that there is no electricity there, and I was trying to use an iPad. 2 days ago, there's still no electricity there. You have to find a place to charge your phone. And I asked all the wrong questions. This was a rock with a chapel built underneath it for a saint that lived up as a hermit up in the hills. And I would ask practical questions like, how did he survive? And the answer was by the grace of God. It was, and this was the Lavas, and I would draw the fathers, and then if I was in front of the church, they would disappear, and then I would add them in later. So the drawings of the sketch would then get added in later, and that was all the scaffolding in the church, which I'm guessing now is completed. And then my final trip was, I think, to the north side, the slightly more difficult monasteries, some may say. It was going into winter. I was boldly exploring. It was cold. Again, I was making mistakes. This is zoghrafu. I'll tell you one story in zoghrafu. It was November. It was very, very cold. No, it's December. Looking at the date there. Very, very cold. And I was put up in a room a long way from the rest of what I thought was a long way from the rest of the monastery. And there was a wood burning stove in the room. And on the second floor, leading up to the fourth floor where I was staying, there was a mountain of wood. And I took some of that wood, and I got the fire burning for the night. And I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was full of smoke, and I couldn't feel my hands. They'd gone numb. I walked into a door. I was very ill for 24 hours. 2 days later, I emerged and went back down to have my first meal. And a father approached me and said, "You took the wrong wood." That wood was meant for a father who was on the second floor, and it had been collected for him, and I'd taken his wood. Svigmanu, again, there's the message there, which is a very bold message. Difficult monastery, but I was made welcome, just as I was at many of the monasteries there. And I love those moments of interaction in the ports. There's the guy with the cross on his back. I could see in his eyes he had arrived at the port. He'd been in some remote part of the island of Mount Athos for a long time. It was like he'd come out of a dark room and he was just looking at the light for the first time. And I'm racing forward for time now. I started drawing more with an iPad as I progressed through the project again. These are the woodcutters harvesting. This is a great opportunity to capture the fathers in their activities, and this is what I think we chose for the cover of the catalogue. A nice little sort of anecdote, a sort of hierarchy of the monasteries here. You've got the father at the top of the ladder, you've got the novice holding the ladder steady, and you've got the pilgrim carrying the fruit away. There's an order to things. This was a meeting of the monks at the entrance to Xenophontus. and I think these are a group of fathers. I think of the islands being very small. Everyone knows each other. Everyone sees each other regularly. They had a very warm hug and welcome, and it was really nice. I just happened to be there waiting to go on to the next monastery. And I got to witness this lovely sort of exchange, which I then developed into a painting. But, yeah. Okay. And the final monastery that just before, I think about the 20th of December, was the building of the guest house at Panteleimonos. And then we had the exhibition in the Mount Athos Centre. We hung the work and showed the iPad drawings. I wanted to be sure that I included the sketchbooks, the pens and brushes, and the process by which this artwork was produced. I wanted to include it. And the book, of course, was critically received as well. So, sorry, this last week I've been back. So on what day is it today? Wednesday. So Monday I was walking past this building. You see the boat with 500 on it. There was two fathers working on the boat. The building was being renovated. That's the building now, fully renovated. Solar panels on the roof. The boat is still there. The fathers still outside their workshops. They spend a little bit more time on their phones. There's a few more cars. Simonas Petrus still has no electricity, so my charges weren't much. And this was a small kili that was being built between Eviron and Stavronikita. Solar panels, lovely boat, water supply being put in there. So the transformation is there. The world has changed in the last 10 years, from 2013 to 2025. And while the facade of Mount Athos might have changed in the process of renovating, new roofs, I think the heart has remained the same. It still feels very much the same. That's the guest house at Panteleimonos. That is still very much there. So I think just while I want to a quick summary of a bit of a summary of why I'm making that work. There's an explorer friend of mine called Benedict Allen, and he talks about being the product of our times. He appears on the surface to be a very traditional, old-fashioned Indiana Jones type explorer. He talks very much about, we are all products of our times, and what was relevant yesterday might not necessarily be relevant today. So the important thing, and I think what I continue to reiterate to my students and to all our students, is that to be relevant today, you've got to find something you care about. You've got to be passionate about something. You've got to do that thing that you care about with conviction. The reason I came to Mount Athos, as I say, on the back of those very public experiences at World Cups and Olympic Games, was to disconnect, to witness the past, or at least to see the past living in the present. But I don't think it's enough to disconnect. I think you have to make yourself relevant to someone else. It's not just about having something that you care about. You've got to tell people about what you care about, and that's about finding an audience for your work. And you find that audience through dissemination. We share our knowledge. We have opportunities like this to speak. And then there's a kind of global platform online. If you're making a drawing and you exhibit that drawing, you can only interact with that drawing if you're in front of it, one-to-one. But if you're sharing your work, if you're publishing your work, then your audience is a global audience. And so there's a sort of responsibility there. I think, my relationship, as I move this talk now towards the technology, are we okay for time? As I talk about the relationship with technology, you've seen many of those drawings that I've just shown you are traditional drawings, watercolors, pages in a sketchbook, a drawing made on the street in Meteora last week, the weekend. Going back to that drawing from the Lebanon, here's a group of kids at a school kicking a football. the St. Stephen's and the three Aghioreit at the top of the mountains. These drawings were 3:30 in the morning, in the dark, in Aveyron. Beautiful experience of listening to those hypnotic chanting services, the smell, the light, the shadows. I can't see what I'm drawing. I can't understand. I see the repetition in the process, and I see the absolute absorption in the moment that the fathers are taking and the pilgrims are experiencing. And I'm just taking my pen to my paper, almost in the dark, almost drawing blind. And when I come out, these drawings are kind of, they capture, for me, they're very simple. They're not anatomically correct. That drawing of the Discobolus character from the British Museum when I was 17, I wanted to make it academically correct. That's not what this drawing is about. It's about capturing that moment. But that work sits in my sketchbook. So I have to find a way to share that work. And to share it, you can do a bit of post-production. You can clean the work up on a computer, post it on Facebook, on Instagram, work through publishers. This is in Meteora, my sketchbook from Meteora last week. This is the carriage that goes, the VIP lane that goes from one road into the monastery. You have to have a strong heart to do that. So these are very loose sketches, and all I've done is I've taken a simple photograph of the page on my sketchbook, cleaned up that page, placed it on the background of a sketchbook, and then you have something that you can publish. These are the pages that I was just showing you. And so that's where I'm using a laptop as a way. I'm using sort of design as a way of sharing and disseminating that work. But when I'm using an iPad, I'm using it as a kind of sketchbook. I'm using it as a time-based sketchbook. So whenever your stylus connects with the screen, that creates a little bit of code that is part of that drawing. And if you make 20 lines, that's 20 bits of code. And that code then creates the experience of that drawing. And I think drawing is a very pure act. There's another teacher that I know called Louis Netta, and he talks about illustration or reporting. Drawing is about responding to things in real time. And when you're drawing, you're bringing your thoughts, your ideas, your actions into that drawing. And when you look back at that drawing, it tells you back about that scene that you witnessed. It gives you back some of that experience. It's a sort of magic space, I think, that uniquely exists with drawing, whether it's digital or whether it's line. And I think the goal or the aim or the challenge is how do you continue to share that work at a time when technology is consuming so much of how we practice. In some ways, I would say drawing, it goes all the way back to cave painting. It's a very sort of relatively slow process now. But it is a remarkable human document. And I think while there is a lot of discussion, I'm sure you're having these discussions with your students, I know I am, around how AI might be in some way reducing, it's a loss to humanity, then I think drawing is still something to be cherished. Louis says, there is nothing more humane. Maintaining a connection to drawing is as essential as maintaining a connection to language and our own humanity. So I think, I've shown you some line drawings in the sketchbook, and now I've got some stills here. These are some moments from a drawing that was made on an iPad. And as I say, the difference between drawing on an iPad and drawing on a sheet of paper is you can create a movie the drawing becomes a time-based movie. So I'll just give you an example of what I mean. So those of you that have been to, has everyone in here been to Meteora? Is that a silly question? You've all been, right? So this was my first time. And from the closed world of Mount Athos to I was really interested to see the open space of Meteora, this remarkable landscape. Hard to believe that on the top of that landscape is the architecture that you see there. But also to see the people that were there. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This has a global audience. And it was really interesting to see that. So I wanted to go from the high street of Kalambaka into through across that high street, past the schools, past the cafes, past the shops, and then up into the hills. And I wanted to end at the monastery that was the furthest away, and that was St. Stephen's, which is a nunnery. And so this drawing was made across 3 or 4 hours. I'll just say that there's a bit of the sound that is in the background. It's raw audio, but again, while I'm drawing, while I'm in one of the services, I'm not taking photographs in the services. When I'm making those drawings, I'm not offending any of the fathers, but I did make a recording of some of the singing, and then I can just add that recording. So it brings it. So the recording was made in Stavronikita 2 nights ago. The drawing was made 4 days ago on an iPad, and I just put the two together. So it's a process of chance encounters with tourists, pilgrims, travelers. Everyday life of a remarkable village at the foot of these incredible mountains. Drawings made in the moment. And as you sort of swipe left, as I go through the stages of the drawings, as I progress along the path, I start to add scale into the drawing. So the figures in the bottom left now are tiny, and the mountain becomes more important. 21st century. So what, and again, if I had more time to publish this, which I can do at a later stage, I can change the speed at which this plays back. This is around 4 or 5 minutes, but it can be less than that. It can be a little 30-second snapshot of that experience, which can be published on social media. I put a little video of this up. 700 people have seen that. So you have an immediate audience for that work. Whereas if you wanted to put this work into an exhibition, then you can spend a little bit more time with the film. You could make more work out of the sound. This is just audio recorded on my phone. You can hear fathers shuffling around in the background. Beautiful voice, Father Sabas. Yeah. High school. And I like the idea that the drawing is a record of time. It's not just a moment, it's a sort of record of that journey. Yes. Because he was there, and that statue was there. Yeah. Sanu. Everyone's on top of the highest hill taking selfies. It's a very windy road. I like to drop in a little bit of photography, just a sense of place. I mean, I think time-based film once was very time-consuming to make, whereas now it's a very quick process. It's a very democratic process. I was talking to Thomas this morning. His work is on show at the Mantathos Center now about photography. Everyone is a photographer now. We all take photographs on our phones. Technology makes things more accessible, but it's what you do with it that counts. And when you get to the top, the very top of the last hill, there's a souvenir shop. And the monasteries restrict the hours that they open for. And I guess that's a very practical decision, because it must be so hard for the nuns and the fathers to have so many people watching them. This is just a run. Okay, so that's enough work, I think, for me to show you. But I've got a couple of options now. I can either, I'm in your hands, really. We can have some questions. Doug's still here. We can have some questions. I can show you some examples of how I go from sketchbook into the design process for showing that work. I can show you how the tablet works for drawing. So I'm easy. Yeah.
Δεν ξέρω αν κουραστήκατε, αν θέλετε να κάνετε κάποια ερώτηση για τη δουλειά του Tim ή να μας δείξει ακόμα ένα παράδειγμα από τη δουλειά του και με αυτό να ολοκληρώσουμε. Δεν ξέρω. Ναι, βεβαίως. Ναι. Όχι, σχεδιάζει απευθείας πάνω στο iPad. Ναι. Okay. Let's give us another example.
Okay. So of a film.
Yes, of a film.
Okay. Shall I?
Or if you would like to show how it comes from your schedule to the iPad.
Yeah, I was thinking if I mean, do any of you teach students any art and design? Is there anyone here that is teaching their students art and design? Or is it perhaps, yeah, would you be interested in seeing? Okay, so if you take those the drawings from my sketchbook of those 3 o'clock in the morning moments that you capture in very sort of blind drawings. I think when you're publishing work digitally, you've got to present it in a clean way. You've got to think about graphic design, and you've got to think about the process by which people are experiencing that work. They can't see the ink and touch the paper in the way that you can if you're there in an exhibition. So the first thing I would do is I would open the drawing in Photoshop, and I'd clean it up. So basically, I don't want all that noise around the edge of the sketchbook. I just want the drawing itself. So I'm just selecting. You can see that. Just selecting the imagery that's on the page. I'd take a bit more care. Normally, I'm doing this rather quickly. and I clear that background. Then I'm going to take all the color out of that image. I'm going to just make it black and white, a grayscale image. And then I'm going to just lighten it up a little bit and make it purely black and white. Once I've got a black and white image like that, I can do anything with that image. It's like if you're a printmaker, it's like a layer that you can produce a lithographic print from in any color, but a digital version of that. So I've done that to all of these sketchbook pages. Then I would use InDesign, which is another piece of software. Let me open and I might take, I'd put the background of a sketchbook as the background layer, and I'll place the other drawings from my other sketchbooks over those pages. So let me take those 4 drawings. I'll place them over the top. Once I've got these over the top, I can play around with them and make them layered, change the colors. Bear with me for a minute. It's all transparent layers now. And if I use this direct selection tool here, you can take one of the drawings and change its color. And you can start to coordinate your page where you start to build up layers of colors. Let's say I don't want that one. Now I've got an image that is a clean digital version of that very raw brush moment when I was in the church recording the drawing, but it feels like it's become something else now. And you can control that, and you can direct that. You can build new compositions digitally. So that might be one way in which I use software like Instagram as a way of sharing this work. You don't want to show all your processes on social media. You want to hold something back. So very often I will put 3 or 4 drawings on top of each other and use that as one image to post on Instagram. And I see that as a form of protecting my copyright. Because if I just put one image on, that, anyone can use that image. If I put 2 or 3 layers on top of each other, then they get a sense of what that experience is, but you're protecting. And I think your students will be very concerned with intellectual copyright, image copyright. It's a challenging time for designers at the moment, I think. Okay. And then I'm aware we've been talking for quite a long time, but it might be worth just seeing how the iPad works. So I was just sitting in a chair over there while Anastasios was setting up, and I made a quick drawing of him, but I'm not. No. Let's go back to the gallery. So here's a drawing that I made this morning, and you'll see there's a lot of layers down at the bottom. All those little white boxes along the bottom are layers, and they're like little cells, individual drawings as part of an animation. So your drawing moves. You think when you're making a drawing on an iPad, you're starting to think about the history of that drawing in terms of time and not just in terms of composition. I think when I'm working on a sketchbook, I am thinking about time, but it's more about the composition. And one of the nice things about these layers is by just changing, each layer has one of the fathers there, just walking across to the bell tower. This is the bell tower in Aveyron. You ring the bell. Again, this was made in 20 minutes last night before I came here, just to kind of show you how you can make a drawing move quickly. You can add sound to that, etc. I'm using a software called Procreate. It's amazing what it can do in the sense that you have a color wheel with a million colors, and you choose the color you want. That the color in the top right is the color you picked. You have a series of layers. You can add layers, as many layers as you want. So again, any of you that have a background in printmaking, lithography, screen print, and you think about the layering, the building up of colors, that's how I think about layers in Procreate working. You have a million brushes that you can choose that imitate different pen marks, different lines. I almost find it does too much. In fact, when I started at the Times in 2012 for the Olympic Games, the app was very limited, and I liked the limitations. The software is so good now; it gives you too many options. So I will, and again, I keep reinforcing this to our students: is the software might have you might choose a piece of software and only use 3% of what that software can do, but those 3% that you are using are the bit that works for you. So I'm by no means, my students are far better than me at the technology, but I know why I'm using it, and I think that's the important thing. And then on this side you have the kind of brush size. So you draw on the page. I mean, I might be normally I'd be out in front of a building, but here I might just be using a photograph for reference. If I don't like where that is, I can move it up. It's immediate. It's very sensitive to your drawing line. Add another layer. Change the brush. Change the color. Go over the top. This is one of the things that one of the things that I struggle with. If I draw a circle, it's not an accurate circle. If I draw a circle and I hold my pen down, it will make an accurate circle for me. It does things that I don't want it to do. So I think you have to be cautious. Students love it, and I think there is a certain look to drawings that are made with software, and I think part of the challenge is making your work authentic and honest and of your own making. And I think certainly AI is there's lots of kind of glitches in the way, but it's very convincing. It can create graphic form in a very convincing way, and that is a challenge for all of us. I've been talking a lot. Maybe we should take a little moment. Yeah. Let's. Does anyone have any questions? Would like to ask either Doug or myself anything about what you have seen?
Κάποια ερώτηση, ναι. Το είπε, the program is Procreate.
It's called Procreate.
Procreate.
So the program, the software is a standalone piece of software. It costs about, I think about $9-10. It's not a subscription. It's a very there are certain softwares that you get close to, and there's one thing you can guarantee, that software will change. And it's important that you don't rely on one piece of software when you're working. It will always change. I started, so I started drawing on an iPad in 2012. Yeah, so the first generation iPad came out in 2012, and that was when the Olympic Games were going to be held in London. And I knew that I wanted to be covering the Olympic Games in some capacity. I'd got a good pedigree behind me. People trusted me at sporting events because I'd been to World Cups and I'd been to Olympic Games before. But I'd never worked for a newspaper directly during a tournament, because I couldn't give them a drawing on a piece of paper in the time that they needed it. If I drew an event in the Olympic Games and they published it 2 days later, that event had been forgotten. So when the iPad emerged, that was the point at which I made the jump to digital drawing. Before then, I'd always resisted it. It didn't feel, I didn't feel it was useful for me. Photoshop was useful for some post-production, some design help. But as a drawing tool, it was only when the iPad came out and felt like it was drawing on a piece of paper, but you could publish in real time, that it became useful.
Κάποια άλλη ερώτηση έχετε? Οκ. Ευχαριστήσουμε τον Tim Vyner, να ευχαριστήσουμε και τον Doug Patterson που ήταν μαζί μας. Thank you, Doug. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Thank you for being with us today.
Sorry?
Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, no problem at all. It's my pleasure.
And we are waiting you to be here and go to Mount Athos together.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I hope this year at some point.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. But it was very interesting talk by Tim. It's interesting to see how he works, and the images are great. I mean, I always feel like a kind of an old dinosaur watching Tim. He's sort of like, he's a kind of modern man, really. It's you know, I still work with a quill and a bottle of ink compared to Tim.
Doug, I do the same thing, and you know, bridging that gap. When I look, you started talking about Barsky. I showed you that page from an illuminated manuscript from the 16th century. If the work looks like it was made yesterday, it has that honesty, and yours does that. It's an inspiration to me, and yeah, I mean, I love the technology as much as I love the pen and ink.
Well, I think there's one thing, Tim. We've always been lucky with, you know, we've gained an access through, because we draw and we make a record. So many people travel take photographs and do whatever they do. But there's nothing for me. There's no comparison between kind of pixels and lead in a pencil. I mean, lead in a pencil is still like the definitive.
Don't you find, Doug, when you're drawing on location, that it encourages conversation? It encourages, you know,
dialogue all the time.
Someone is not, that it is an active invitation to come and speak to you about what you're doing. And I think that is a very unique thing to drawing as well. Whereas I think if you, I mean, Thomas is here, and he may disagree perhaps, but you know, when you're on the street with a camera, it doesn't encourage the same kind of conversation. You have to work a little harder to have that conversation, I think, because.
Well, you have to gain the confidence of the person you're photographing. Whereas if you're drawing, you don't really have a dialogue. It tends to be whatever you're drawing. If it's a person, they're coming to you. It's a different experience, I think. But I don't know Thomas, but I mean, it's interesting how different photographers work. But I mean, the travel aspect of what we do, I mean, I've always been, my drawings develop because of my designs. So working as an architect, where I work with craftsmen from all over the world, all my projects, I've never done anything here. They've ranged from ships and films and like designing buildings. And we've always fabricated things in other countries. So the drawings are the instructions. And as the world changed, you know, Tim's mentioning about with Procreate and the iPad, but it changed also as an architect, because I've worked in northern India for many years, since the 80s, where we fabricate in marble and also in stone. And there we went from hand drawing to actually CAD drawings, where they're computer drawings. And then we were sending them by email to a printer in Udaipur in Rajasthan, who printed them, put them inside drain pipes and put them on the roof of the bus to take up to where they're going to be carved. Then the drawings couldn't have any annotation because they couldn't read. So they had to, the drawings had to be self-explanatory. So there were full-size drawings. They had a scale to print them off. So just like what Tim's been talking about, how things change with drawing, how communications change. So for years working with craftsmen, and we still do in Rajasthan, where they're the descendants of the people that built the Taj Mahal. So in the carving, but we had to retrain them into that, the subtlety of what that carving was, because they're not called on to do that. They're called on to copy whatever it is.
I think
So drawing is a fantastic thing, you know, like the drawing the instructions for somebody to carry it out. So it's not only illustrating and capturing the spirit of where you are. And
I think you're making an interesting point there, Doug, about the fact that, you know, the Royal College of Art is actually, it was an institution that was built to, as you say, to train designers as much as artists.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
you're a designer, and you know, your art comes out of your knowledge and understanding of design. And again, I feel that I've got a foot in both camps, and I think the design understanding is key to disseminating and sharing the work that we make.
Okay.
yeah, I think.
Hey, thank you, Doug. I'm afraid that we don't have more time.
Yeah, that's the trouble with artists. They talk forever, especially if they're
You
talking
should
about
come here,
themselves.
Thessaloniki. Be present.
Yeah, that was very impressed, Tim. And thank you. You're always such a great, you bring good people together, Anastasis. You take care, man.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. Να σας ευχαριστήσουμε όλους. Βέβαια, μπήκε λίγο στην κουβέντα και ο καλός φίλος ο Τόμας Μοτσίνσκι, ο φωτογράφος, ο Πολωνός που βρίσκεται σήμερα εδώ μαζί μας. Χθες είχαμε τα εγγένεια της έκθεσής του στην Αγιορειτική Εστία, έκθεση φωτογραφίας, με αυτή την πολύ ιδιαίτερη τεχνική που χρησιμοποιεί ο Τόμας, που είναι μια παλιά τεχνική του τέλους του 19ου αιώνα και αφορά την διχρωμική, η εκτύπωση ως διχρωμική γόμα. Οι φωτογραφίες του είναι πάρα πολύ ωραίες. Μπορείτε να επισκεφτείτε την έκθεσή μας. Θα κρατήσει μέχρι τις 7 Ιουνίου, αν δεν κάνω λάθος. Σωστά, ναι. Οπότε χαιρόμαστε που έγινε σήμερα αυτή η εκδήλωση εδώ. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ όλους. Θα μπορούσαμε να μιλάμε για πολλές ώρες ακόμα, αλλά κάπου πρέπει να βάλουμε ένα τέλος. Thank you. Thank you, Tim, for this.
Thank you.
Just one thing I want to ask you before you go, if you're still on. Is there anybody else in that room? Or is it just you two guys?
It was just the three of us, Doug.
I thought so. Take care. God bless you all.
That's brilliant. Doug.